Hi everyone, welcome to our World Animal Day webinar. Thank you for joining us. We're here to celebrate the first World Animal Day where decapod crustaceans have been officially recognised as sentient animals according to UK law. This webinar will be run by our new CEO, Dr Ben Sturgeon. Ben trained as a veterinary surgeon and in more recent years has moved to work in animal welfare charities. So I'll hand over now to Ben to get started.
Thank you, Anne, and welcome everybody. It's wonderful that you've given your time this evening to be with us on this, well, we think amazing day for us. As Anne mentioned, I was a vet. This was sort of 25 years ago that I qualified from Edinburgh University and then worked in university as well as in general practice before moving to the animal welfare field. And people often ask me, why did I do that? And why did I come to crustacean compassion? And if I can just tell you a short story as basically the reason why. When you qualify as a vet, you have to effectively say that the veterinary equivalent of the doctor's Hippocratic oath. And to kind of paraphrase it for you, it goes something like this. I promise and solemnly swear that I'll pursue the work of my profession with integrity and accept my responsibilities to the public. And it finishes on something along the lines of, above all, my constant endeavour will be to ensure health and welfare of animals committed to my care. Now, when I was saying that you have to stand up with your cap on and everything, I was saying that in the Usher Hall in the middle of Edinburgh. And as I was giving my oath, I actually disagreed with it. And I felt a little bit of a fraud as I was saying it because of that last part that was I would give my constant endeavour to animals under my care. And I very much felt that, and the reason I became a vet was it wasn't just about animals under my care. It was about all animals, big or small, whether they're perceived as important or not, they were things I cared about. And it's that big picture piece that really brought me to animal welfare charities and especially brought me to crustacean compassion, because crustacean compassion represents, these small animals that are often forgotten about, are considered, unimportant, but actually they're vitally important. And I hope that we will learn about that today. And that's, if you like, the aim of the talk is to learn about these fascinating animals. It's also to obviously update you on what crustacean compassion has been doing over the last year, what we're currently doing right now, and obviously how you can help. So I hope this will be an interesting talk for you. So no further ado, we'll go straight on to fascinating decapods. Decapods are a number of crustaceans under the general order Decapoda that includes crabs, lobsters, crayfish, nephrops, and prawns, but there are a huge family of animals within this. Generally, they are animals with a number of appendages attached to their body. The average is 10, hence the name Deca, the Latin name for 10. And these appendages are amended for their environment to assist them. So they have little maxillipeds, little appendages on this crayfish here, which assist them with eating, or they have large ones, obviously, on this crab that are used for picking up food, for tearing food apart. Interestingly, the larger, the dominant one is actually the dominant arm, if you like, or pincer of the crab. So this chap here is left-handed. And the dominant one is also the crusher. You can't see very well, particularly in this picture, but you have little enlarged areas, and these are effectively, they're called the molars, so they're actually the chewing parts of the crab's arm. And this little one is for tearing, so it effectively has incisors on it, but actually these are named molars on there for chewing. They communicate with these pincers by flapping them around, by drumming on the floor. And obviously they use them for protecting themselves, for collecting food, for providing themselves, and competing for hiding spots in the ocean. They have hairs, you can see in this little crab here along the side of the body, that they use to sense the environment around them. They taste the water around them. They can sense temperature changes. They can pick up sound through these areas. They're extremely delicate. And obviously on all of them, we can see these eye stalks, and that gives them 360-degree vision in that area. The shells are molted throughout their lives, so the little shell and they're growing rapidly, they can molt 4 to 5 times a month. As they get larger, they may only molt once or twice a year. So it's a continual evolution forward. To go a little bit more in depth, I find crabs personally extremely interesting. So I'm just basing this on just a few little examples of why I feel they're fascinating. So there's about 7,000 different species of crabs, and that number goes up, I have to say. It's a continued evolution. They're massively diverse: shapes, colors, patterns, sizes, where they live, how they live, what they eat on. It's a huge kind of range of family of animals. To give you a kind of few examples, so we have pictures here, the great giant Japanese spider crab, which has a massive carapace, the shell on the top, up to 16 inches in size. And you can see, in this chap in the tank there, really long legs, beautiful animals that wade around the depths of the ocean. Through right the way to this miniature full spider crab, 1.4 millimeters across, and it will quite literally catch a lift on sea cucumbers, or it will march in great numbers along the bottom of the North Sea, but from massive to small. This crab up here is a personal favorite of mine. This is Metapaulius depressus. This is a crab that lives in bromeliad flowers. Bromeliads are flowers that actually flower quite irregularly, but they're important because they actually house water, as you can see here in this crab, within the plant structure itself. So this crab makes use of this water there. And using that environment, this particular crab lays its larvae into the water, and it also interestingly cares for these larvae as they grow. So it actually will collect insects to feed to the larvae itself. It will collect snail shells to drop into water to increase the calcium content of the actual water for the larvae, and it will protect them. Simple as that. It helps them grow. And the one in the middle here is the common one we see actually on our beaches and our shores. This is the European green crab, and this has been shown to have effectively the mental capabilities of a mouse. It can solve mazes exactly the same, so that they have this massive diversity environments, this huge different behavioral activities that go on. A really incredible species to be involved in. I wouldn't want to go any further without not just saying they're important, they're interesting animals, they have these interesting anatomical features about them. They're extremely important for human health as well as animal health, as well as marine health as well. They're not just rocks with legs. Decapods are often described as the caretakers of the sea, or as ecosystem engineers. They're omnivores. They will feed on decaying matter, filter feed the water itself, and feed on decaying plant material. That's really important because they eat substantial amounts of algae that keeps the plant life clean. It keeps the ocean clean, allows sunlight to come down to the deeper areas of the ocean to allow plant growth, which acts for carbon sinking activities. They will clean coral of algae, again, creating this nice clean coral bed that is really, really important for the ocean environment and for us. About 1 in 6 people depends on coral health for their food, and that includes us in this country. We are surrounded by deep sea corals, not the typical corals we see in nice warm waters. Our corals are about 150 meters deep, and algae growing on those are vital to be cleaned off by the crustacean different species. Furthermore, crustacea are a food source. When they're in the larval phase, so this kind of microscopic image of the larva, this is actually a piece of plankton. When they are larvae, they are food for most things in the ocean. And then obviously as they reach their bethnic or their if you like larger animal size, these obviously become direct food sources for a number of animals. So they're vital across the whole marine ecosystem, vital species that we must protect. So what is a decapod? It is an adapted, evolved aquatic animal to that environment that it lives in. Simple as that. It's adapted extremely well to that environment. It has an exoskeleton, as we can see. It communicates in this difficult media. It can't speak, obviously, but it communicates in different ways that we would associate with other typical animals. And it demonstrates those kind of mammalian type of behaviors and social interactions that we all associate with. It dances for its mates, it protects itself, it communicates, it cares for its young. These are all very kind of associated features that we can associate with. So what I like to do, and of course, as I just pointed out, the only real difference is they wear their bones on the outside. Simple as that. That's all. That's really the only difference. So what I'd like to do is just show you a brief film. I think it's great, this film, and shows you again this diversity of life that decapods are. It shows you social interactions. It shows you this whole different way that these animals communicate and have evolved to interact with each other, that is really rather unique, and I've never seen it in any other species on Earth, I have to say. So it's about 4 minutes long, but it's a great little.
In nature, good homes are all too rare. Here, on a tiny Caribbean island off the coast of Belize, there is a severe housing shortage. Hermit crabs use abandoned seashells as mobile homes. As a crab grows, its shell becomes an ever tighter fit. So eventually a crab needs to move in to a bigger one. Suitable empty shells are few and far between, and this one is far too spacious for this crab. But instead of continuing its search, this small crab settles down to wait. Other crabs, also looking to upgrade to a bigger home, soon gather whenever a shell washes ashore. Unfortunately, the new shell is too big for them too. Despite that, the gathering crabs begin to measure each other up, and then they do something really rather extraordinary. They arrange themselves into an orderly queue. The biggest at the front, smallest at the back. They're lining up with one aim: to exchange properties. But none of the crabs can make a move because the chain is not yet complete. They're all waiting for the right-sized crab to come along. And this is it. The latest arrival pushes to the head of the queue. At first, the chain falls apart. As it reforms, the small crab finally makes its move and takes its place at the end of the line. After a close inspection, the big crab moves in. This triggers a chain reaction. Each crab hurriedly moves into the shell vacated by the crab ahead of it in the line. A fresh arrival muscles in. To be left without a shell is a death sentence. A naked crab will quickly cook under the intense tropical sun. But after all the swapping, there is still one shell left. Sadly, it's no bigger than this small crab's original shell. And worse, it's got a hole in it. But even a bad shell is better than being homeless. The small crab's need to upgrade will be even more urgent by the time the next shell rolls ashore.
Isn't that wonderful? I think that's a great film. I say I've never seen that kind of behavior in any other species. Yeah, it just shows just this array of behaviors in a species that we actually don't know a huge amount about. So sorry, just trying to move on. As Anne mentioned, this is actually a very special day for us. This is World Animal Day, and in a strange way, that this is the first time decapod crustaceans have been included in that. Actually, if you like, considered as animals. This came from a legislative change in earlier this year, where they were recognized as animals under the Animal Welfare Sentience Act. And it was actually the very first time that decapod crustaceans were included in any UK legislation. And prior to this, really only animals, described animals were included in legislation, and animals were described only as those with vertebrae, in other words, with a backbone. So it's really important to us this day because this was the first time they were recognized within that legislation. And this is legislation. This is the legislation on the Animal Welfare Sentience Act, and as you can see there in red, it includes any decapod crustaceans. So that was a huge achievement for the organisation and well, at least in the UK terms, within the UK itself. So what actually does, or what should this mean? What it should mean and what it does mean is that any new legislation which involves decapods will have to include the fact that they are considered sentient. In other words, that they feel pain, they feel joy, they are sentient animals, and all new legislation will have to include that within its considerations. And it also means that an animal sentience committee that has now been formed or is being formed this year will have to take that consideration into all considerations whenever new policies are being produced within the UK. And that it should then underpin the UK's plans, the government's plans to improve animal welfare and eradicate cruel practices, and hopefully position the UK as a world leader within animal welfare. That's what it does and what it should be. And how we got to that stage was effectively through developing a burden of proof to prove that these animals were sentient, that they had pain, that they felt pain, they experienced pain, that they also experienced joy. And that was based on the direct work of Crustacean Compassion, collecting nearly 60,000 signatures, getting the express support of 55 experts, veterinary experts, marine biology experts, animal specialist experts, and also with 41 different organisations who supported our goals to have decapods included in UK legislation. And that resulted in the government requesting DEFRA to commission a report on the evidence of sentience in decapod crustaceans. And that was undertaken by, or led by Jonathan Birch at the London School of Economics and Politics, looking at over 300 different pieces of information reviewing decapod sentience. And they looked at 8 different areas for evaluating that. First one is the possession of nociceptors or pain receptors, the same as we have for pain receptors. Possession of integrated brain regions or areas within a brain center that could actually process information and result in a response to it. Whether those 2 areas were linked, whether those pain receptors result in an integrated brain response and again a reaction, not just a reflex reaction. Whether any of those responses would be changed by use of local anesthetics or painkillers. Whether crabs or any of the decapods demonstrated motivational trade-offs, in other words, whether they balance threat versus opportunity for reward in certain situations, whether they showed self-protection when exposed to injury or to threat, whether they had learning abilities beyond simple habitualization, and lastly, whether behavior was demonstrated by the animals that showed valuing painkillers when they were actually injured. So they looked at those 8 different areas. And to kind of, I guess, really just kind of summarize it very briefly, the findings that the LSE found were really kind of threefold, I suppose. And again, this is directly from the report. Based on our research, we recommend that all decapod crustaceans be regarded as sentient animals for the purposes of UK animal welfare law. And the other 2 bits they said really was they should be counted as animals, which is why we're here on World Animal Day, for the purposes of the Animal Welfare Act and included in the scope of any future legislation relating to animal sentience. So they were their direct findings. What I want to show you also is a couple of the examples that were taken away from that, just again, show you, give you a little bit of an insight into the behavior of these animals, the kind of typical scientific experiments they've been involved in. Again, just to broaden the picture for you to understand them much better. So this is an experiment that was taken from the LSE report, and this is demonstrating the connection between pain receptors and integrated brain regions. So what they were doing here was effectively giving a crab a nice kind of area to kind of hide in, a shell or a dark area, but they were exposing the crabs to electric shocks when they entered these dark shelters. Dark shelters are great for a crab. That's where they like to go. They're solitary. That's their sense of protection. And what happened was when the crabs received these shocks, they basically didn't go back. 24 to 4 days was the kind of typical length, and that's the length of the experiment. And again, the graph on the right shows that. So these kind of areas are basically crabs going into the dark areas, and once they started getting shocked this area, you can see they dropped off. Some crabs went back for a second look. That's not uncommon at all. I have to admit, I do the same thing. Sometimes when I touch something hot, I go, was that really hot? And I touch it again. So I'm no brighter than a crab. And I think, again, this just demonstrates these typical behaviors that they felt pain and then they reacted to it. It wasn't just a reflex reaction of running out and then going back, running out and then going back. There was actually then an integrated process where they went, I'm not going back into that area. So what we can take from that simple example is that decapods learn. They form memories. They actually form memories about what's going on within that environment. And the chap undertaking this experiment kind of elucidated a little bit further on this. He said they're not just reacting reflexly, they are actually experiencing pain. And that's a really fundamental point and a really important point when we consider sentience and animal behavior. They're actually experiencing that pain. Second example, I'm not going to play the video again, was motivational trade-offs. Do crabs or do decapods show effectively a behavioral change when there is opportunity or even risk involved? And I think the film really demonstrates that really well, especially for the little guy right at the end at about 4:30 minutes. He had a big risk. He was the smallest chap on the end of that line. And as David Attenborough kind of pointed out there, no shell almost means certain death. So there was a big opportunity, but there was also a big risk involved, really, for all of those animals in that line. So they definitely demonstrate that motivational trade-off. And again, that's a really important behavioral piece. And as I say, I haven't seen that really in many other animal species. So I think that video demonstrates that really, really nicely. Oh, sorry, I'm not going to play it again. Trying to stop it now. And then lastly, again, a similar experiment is, do animals change the behavior when they're injured and when they receive painkillers? And again, this is a relatively simple experiment using prawns in this particular case, where they actually cut the prawn antenna, the eye stalk antenna. And what the prawns did was obviously demonstrate behavioral responses to pain. They flipped their tails. They showed these kind of activities that were saying, I'm in pain here. And then when they applied painkillers, the animal simply stopped that behavior, or at least it was massively mitigated. They did the same experiment with electric shocks again, and again gave morphine, and again showed that massive change in behavior because they valued anesthetics or painkillers. So again, a really kind of simple respond to painkillers. I'm often asked, or kind of, the question of anthropomorphism comes up. Again, the way I've been presenting this, I hope you can associate with, and you can kind of understand kind of the reactions to them. Although they're aquatic animals, you kind of think of them perhaps in kind of more mammalian terms. And I think they are very similar, I have to say. You can see this cat here reacting in a kind of an aggressive way to some kind of provocation. Why not? Why not a lobster? They do the same things. They're trying to protect themselves. They're not doing anything reflexly. They are simply reacting to the environment that they're in. And importantly, when we actually look a little bit further into the anatomy of these animals, there are a number of examples of similar kind of behaviors that we as humans can relate to. So crayfish have what are called behavioral command neurons. These are important in humans, and they're important neuronal bodies that stimulate complex patterns of behavior, not simple reactions of patterns of behavior, but complex ones: social interaction, hierarchy, dominance. All these kind of things come into these neuronal activities. They also produce different neurotransmitters, transmitters that affect how the brain works, how you react from a nerve cell body. We produce GABA, which is important. Humans produce this, and as do crustaceans, that regulates mood, memory, and pain, as I put here. They also produce serotonin, a really important neurotransmitter in human terms, which goes up and down depending on dominance level, on social status, and on mood again. And as we've already mentioned, they also produce morphine, which is not just a neurotransmitter that regulates behavior, but is also a really important pain response chemical. So they produce many very similar physiological responses that we do in social situations. So now I'd ask you, so now what would we describe as a decapod? It's still an adapted and evolved aquatic animal. That's exactly what it is. But now we know it has neurophysiological as well as anatomical adaptation. It's not just a rock with legs. It has massive kind of physiological responses to different environments that it's placed in. That it shows evidence of pain response, evidence of behavior, complex behavioral activities, and evidence of cognitive thinking responses. It shows evidence of having memory, of creativity, and possibly reason. So these are really fascinating, intricate animals that are reacting to the environment that it's in. So what does this actually mean? Or really, why does it matter? Or why does it matter to me? And why should it matter to you? Because we do some pretty dreadful things to these animals. We decapitate them alive, we boil them alive, we cook them alive, we put them on barbecues alive, we put them in the deep freeze alive, we send them in the post alive, we kill them without any knowledge of the appropriate way to do it, we stack them on top of one another in poorly aerated environments for them. We do masses of things that are simply awful to a live, sentient animal capable of feeling pain, experiencing pain, as well as having a complex neuroanatomical adaptation, suggesting that they can reason and have memory. And these kind of dreadful things that we do occur across the board, from the moment of capture through effectively to the point of landing, if you like, unfortunately, on somebody's plate, from that sea to plate journey, that capture in transport, in how they're stored or held, in the mutilations that go on with them, and eventually how they're actually killed in itself. And there are probably other areas that we don't even know. For example, they are used in scientific experimentation, and we have no idea of the numbers that are going on there. And it's likely to be, if not hundreds of thousands, millions of animals. In total, we're talking 420 million plus animals are landed simply in the UK. That's a massive scale of suffering that we need to be aware of. So at capture, we know the process of trawling, for example, results in deaths, high levels of deaths of these animals before landing of them. the use of the typical kind of fishing activities using pots or traps or creels results in cannibalism, often lost animals, or animals simply dying within those pots as well. They are killed regularly as part of bycatching fishing, and when they're caught and handled on boat, they're often injured in that process as well. They're either stacked on top of each other, resulting in death of the ones underneath, or injuries to the ones underneath. So again, there's massive welfare concerns for these animals at that point. They're placed in dry environments, again, stacked on top of one another in an environment that is extremely stressful, inappropriate fluctuating temperatures. If there is water of inappropriate quality, resulting again in high levels of death, poor quality survival rates of these animals. And actually these have an impact then, again, from a processing point of view or from the consumer's point of view on meat quality, for example, and also on bacterial content of some of these animals as well. Even in storage, again, we've already seen the pictures of them stacked on top of one another in water, in overstocked tanks, where the water salinity, where the water temperature, where the toxins in the water aren't regulated at all. And again, this results in a low level of survivability for these animals, and also affects, obviously, the consumer output. So again, these are huge areas of welfare concern. We regularly mutilate them. Eye stalks are regularly cut off of prawns and shrimps to apparently increase their fecundity in breeding. We regularly declaw crabs and just take the claws off for eating and throw the rest of the crab back into the sea. Claws are nicked to prevent them kind of nipping people, and nephrops or langoustines are regularly just simply torn in half. Simple as that. And the tail thrown on the boat and the rest of the animal thrown out the side. Totally unacceptable given what we now know about these animals. And lastly, if you like, on this kind of awful journey they've already been through, they're killed pretty much indiscriminately. They are boiled alive, as we already mentioned. They are put in deep freezers, expecting them to kind of die in that. They are drowned in fresh water. They are simply dismembered and carved up alive. And all of these things are totally unacceptable. There are various kind of figures out there that can take up to 3 to 4 minutes for a lobster or a crab to die in boiling water. When they are decapitated, for example, the nephrop being torn in half, they will live for 30 minutes after that process. They take 30 to 40 minutes, if not longer, simply to become, if you like, unconscious within a deep freeze. That doesn't mean they're dead. It doesn't mean they're not feeling pain. It just simply means they're becoming insensible. So again, we do massive amount of welfare damage to these animals that are fully sentient. Perhaps the next 2 slides, I think, for me at least, say it all. So I want you just to look at this picture and remember what we've said about a decapod. This is alive, and in this picture, this animal is alive. This is a live, sentient, aquatic animal. This is an animal that normally hides in dark shelters. It uses its pincers to communicate. It uses its eye stalks to look around. It requires its gills to be covered in water, or at least in a high humidity environment, to actually be able to survive and breathe. This is an animal that's been shrink wrapped. It's been shrink wrapped, placed on a plastic tray in a bright area and put in a fridge for somebody to buy alive and take home and kill it utterly as they see fit. It's just totally unacceptable in today's society. And secondly, this was a picture taken by me. This was very recently, probably about a month ago now. This is in a harbour very close to where I live. And this, what you'll see here is a kind of person walking up the road here with the harbour behind him. And you'll see in the bag, and I've kind of highlighted the bag, you'll see in his plastic bag, in his Tesco's bag there, he has a live lobster. What I witnessed of this was this particular person was on the banks of the harbour. This is very common. Went up to the boat that had just come and said, "Can I have some live lobsters?" Fisherman said, "Yeah, mate, 20 quid or something." I can't quite remember exactly how much it was now. The chap took the lobster, chucked it in his bag. This was a live animal, started walking away. Then he turned back, went up to the fisherman and said, "What do I do with it, mate?" And the fisherman said to him, "Just lob it in some boiling water." Again, this is totally unacceptable, totally unacceptable. the fact that you could go and buy a live sentient animal, stick it in a plastic bag. Who knows whether this was actually killed even quickly. It could have just simply died in the back of his car. Totally unacceptable. The fact that the fisherman had no real regard for the product, for the animal that he caught. This is a beautiful blue lobster from the North Sea, and just said, just chuck it in some boiling water, mate. It astounds me, given the knowledge that we have of these animals and that they are So again, what does this all mean? Perhaps it's kind of becoming, I hope, pretty obvious now. What it means is that we have to accept, or indeed, if that's your situation, ignore the scientific evidence that is overwhelming, and that we should make decisions and base our choices on this evidence, and that we must take responsibility for those decisions and the evidence that's given to us. And this is called ethical decision making. It's looking at the evidence, it's making a decision, and it's taking responsibility. And that's now where we are with decapods. We have the evidence. Not just at that end point where we may order, I don't, but a lobster thermidor or whatever it is. It's not just at that point. It's across the entire industry, if you like, from that point of capture through to actually ending up on someone's plate, as well as in their use in science, in experimentation, as well as our consideration of our interaction with them as marine animals, as ecosystem engineers in that marine environment, in that sense of marine biodiversity and conservation. And let's not forget what the LSE said, is that they recommended that they are treated as sentient animals for the purposes of the Animal Welfare Law, and they are counted as animals in the Animal Welfare Act and in all future legislation. All future legislation. That was their recommendation. And the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission backed that up. They said the Sentience Act is only of value if those species in it are treated under the Animal Welfare Act and under all legislation, under all associated legislation. So that's what we've really got to look at. So what is this legislation? We've already mentioned the Animal Welfare Sentience Act, if you like. It's not at the bottom here, but there, if you like, 5 kind of key considerations when we look at that legislation. We have the Animal Welfare Sentience Act. We have the welfare of animals at time of killings regulation. So this is actually the point of slaughter. We have, the welfare of animals in transport, so from boat to shore and shore to processing unit. We have the Animal in Scientific Procedures Act, that, as a kind of intimated, we don't know a huge lot about the amount of animals being used in science and their welfare in that environment. And if you like, the overall enshrining whole Animal Welfare Act, that is really just the kind of gold standard of animal welfare within the UK. So if you like, I'm going to break it down into, if you like, 3 legislative pillars to make it a little bit easier. So we have Animal Welfare Acts. Now, it isn't just a UK one, it's actually 3 separate pieces of legislation. We have England and Wales as one, Scotland and Northern Ireland. So each of the home nations as such can have its own version of the Animal Welfare Act. But effectively what this act states is that it creates a legislation that demands a duty of care to protect animals from suffering, from unnecessary suffering, and it should set out what steps need to be taken. It's important to highlight here that this Animal Welfare, the Animal Welfare Acts, can be changed immediately, as long as the authority, which is a minister, is satisfied that on the basis of scientific evidence that the animals that they want to put in there are capable of experiencing pain or suffering. And we know they are. It's in the Animal Welfare Sentience Act. It needs to be in the Animal Welfare Act, the overall one. There is the Animals in Scientific Procedures Act, we've said. We know that decapods are used in scientific experimentation, but currently they're not covered by any legislation at all. So what that needs to be updated, improved, and their records need to be kept so that we can monitor their welfare and ensure that they're treated appropriately. And then the last pillar, I've kind of put them both together, the welfare at time of killing, the welfare in transport. Again, really, this is just, again, trying to cover that sea to plate journey, which is, again, creating that duty of care to protect them from suffering during this process, the same as we would with any other animal coming from the farm, whether that's a chicken, a sheep, a pig. We would ensure that their welfare is considered in those processes, from when they're taken from the farm to the time they end up, unfortunately, at the slaughterhouse. And it's really important that that welfare is maintained. And again, these acts or these orders or regulations already have the capacity to be extended if the minister so chooses to do so. So again, we really just, these acts and various orders can be changed relatively rapidly. And that's what we're pushing towards at the moment. And we would think, or we would expect, that given that the Animal Welfare Sentience Act has received royal assent, it is in planning, that the other areas of the legislation should follow suit. Simple as that, because they recognise that these animals are sentient. The fact of the matter is, though, it's not happening. Simple as that. It's not happening right now. And there's a lot of effort going into understanding why that is, in putting pressure towards changing that. And again, that's where the body, well, not the entire body, but a large part of our work is being undertaken right now. And we're working along three primary areas. One is obviously in that political change. So we directly lobster ministers. We've spoken to and sent letters to the Prime Minister and try to engage in cross-party commitments across all of the parties towards decapod welfare. We have linked in with all of the 4 home nations. We've requested amendments and provided amendments to the Animal Welfare Act. We've requested clarification for updating of the Animal Welfare Act, as well as the regulations and orders. We have worked with the Home Office, the Scientific Policy Review Unit, to look at the animals in scientific procedures. So we're doing an awful lot from a political perspective to try and push that legislation through. We also working directly with industry, that entire chain process, to understand that process, to understand where those areas of welfare compromise lie. So again, we can assist with them to making practical changes to improve welfare to a gold standard level, and that's what we should be working towards. We're working on and delivering codes of practice and assisting them with that. We're working on innovative solutions to assist them from that sea to plate journey to improve welfare across the board. We're working with them to deliver technical expertise, again, to assist them to make the right choices, and lobbying and working with them towards that end of high welfare. And lastly, but certainly not least, we're trying to engage in a cultural change program. This is part of the reason for the talk. We're trying to engage people in understanding these animals, understanding their importance, not just for their own right, but to us as well as human beings, and to us on this planet from a marine environment perspective. So we're trying to encourage attitudinal change and behavioral change latterly then towards these animals. We utilize then your knowledge, your public support to create pressure, to demand an end to cruel practice, such as posting a live animal in the post or boiling it alive, and demanding that these things change. To deliver equally, to work with alliances and scientific experts, again, to upgrade that level of information to ensure that we are challenging where appropriate and giving informed choices to people across the board in industry, in politics, and as the general public and the consumer. And we hope that that work will be ongoing and lead to change from yourselves in the public, saying, I want a high welfare product. I want to eat something that I know has been looked after from that sea to plate journey, not ignored, because now it should be. We've got the evidence to say that it needs to be. So how can you help? This QR code here, please pick up your phone and scan that. That will take you to our website, and you'll see all the information. You can read about the LSC report. You can read about all the other things we've been doing. You can sign up. There are letters of action. You can take action. And obviously, if you have any spare pennies, we'd be delighted to have any donations to obviously continue with our work. When you're in the general public, request high welfare products. It's unlikely that you'll find many right now, unfortunately, but just by saying, where does this come from? Do you kill it appropriately? How do you follow high welfare for this animal? that starts the machinations of the restaurant owners or the sellers saying, people are asking for this now. We want high welfare decapods to be as common as a free range egg. When I grew up, you didn't get free range eggs, but now they're everywhere, quite literally, and that's what I buy. We want the same for these animals. We have to recognize their welfare importance. Consider your interaction with them on that as a wild species. They're a wild, aquatic, sentient animal. So just consider that interaction you have with them in that ocean environment, and how you can educate others to have that same interaction with them. Remember, they are a live, sentient, aquatic creature that is fabulously adapted, fabulously changed to actually understand its environment. And so we need to show respect to these animals. And that is not just on the beach, that is throughout the life cycle that they go through. And so I hope all of that was really interesting to you. Thank you very much for your time. We're open now for questions, and I think you've been sending them across as I've been speaking. I hope that was really interesting. I'll go back to the previous slide so that you can scan as the questions kind of come in, and then we'll kind of go from there. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it.